Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I hope that everyone can see myself and all of our panelists. Welcome to this very exciting launch event for our wonderful new report from the Center for Strategic Philanthropy in collaboration with the Impact Investors Foundation, Nigeria, and also SME.MG. And my name is Dr. Shanali Banerjee. I'm here with my colleague, CJBS Visiting Associate, Elena Christodoulou. And I'm also very, very lucky to be joined by three amazing industry experts in the impact investing space, specifically in Nigeria. So we're very, very happy to have you all here. It seems like lots of folks are now coming in and trickling in as I speak. So as everyone is signing on, I will just go through a little bit of housekeeping for the event today. So we'll be all together for about 90 minutes today to go over some of the key findings from this report and also to have a great question and answer session with our wonderful panel. And for the final 30 minutes today, so from about 3 p.m. GMT onward, we'll have about 30 or so minutes for an open question and answer session with the panel. So at that point, we will very much invite you all to join in, to put your questions into the Q&A feature. So rather than putting your questions into the chat, where you can say hello, introduce yourself, etc., so that we can definitely see all of your questions, please use the Q&A function, which should be kind of at the bottom panel of your screen. It specifically says question and answer. So hopefully everyone can hear me and everyone can see the slide deck that we have for you. So I will just tell you a little bit about the Center for Strategic Philanthropy, why we're all here, why we were so interested in doing this research on impact investing and philanthropy in Nigeria. So the Center for Strategic Philanthropy, we are about nearly 3 years old now. We were launched in March of 2020 as a specific research center, an academic research center on philanthropy in emerging markets, specifically looking at Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. So if you're thinking, that we're a research center on philanthropy, why this report on impact investing? It's a very good question. So what we found out when we were launching our research agenda over the last year is that there is an enormous interest from the philanthropy sector in impact investing and in how impact investing and philanthropy can coincide, how philanthropists can get more involved in impact investing and new financial instruments for philanthropy. And so there was an overwhelming interest in this. And as our report shows, the report that we're launching today, there were more than 80% of respondents in our research agenda survey in the philanthropy sector said that they have a great interest in learning more about impact investing. So this is the first project that we as a center have done on these new financial instruments and how impact investing can involve itself in the philanthropic sector, or rather how the philanthropic sector can involve itself further in impact investing. And so I just wanted to point out, I saw in the Q&A that someone says that the chat function was disabled. This is now, should be enabled. So hopefully everyone can now join into the chat. Please feel free to introduce yourself, say where you're from, say hello. My colleague will also be posting the link to the full link to the report, which is live as of today, so that everyone can get a copy of the report and also follow along. So why are we here today? The most important thing is, of course, to launch this report. This has been quite a labor of love for a lot of us here. I just wanted to say thank you very specifically to my colleagues at the Impact Investors Foundation in Nigeria, and also to SME.MG, because without these two wonderful partners, we would not be able to have done this study in the first place. We'd also like to thank our advisors, 3 of whom are actually on the panel today. We're very lucky. We also want to thank Chris West and Queen Chinere Quinn, and of course, the CSP's inaugural executive director, Claire Woodcraft, who I believe is also here today. Without Claire and her enthusiasm for looking at new instruments in philanthropy and how philanthropy can be more effective, we wouldn't have this project. So, so thank you so much. Thank you also to every single participant. If some of you are here who participated in this research, allowed us to interview you, took part in the survey, we are so grateful because your insights are the most important thing that came out of this project. And so, so let's just get straight into things and get straight into the agenda. So, so we will spend, Elena and myself will spend just a few minutes going over some of the major findings in the report, which we hope that you will all find very interesting. And after that, after about 10-15 minutes, we will move straight into the panel discussion. We have a fantastic panel for you today. We have Thelma Ekiyor with us, who is the co-founder and managing director of SME.MG, which is a network of thousands of SMEs in Nigeria. And again, we would not have been able to do this work without her involvement and her team's support. We also have Etemore Glover, who is the projects lead at the Impact Investors Foundation in Nigeria. And they do a lot of incredible work on the ground in Nigeria, working on kind of advocacy and accessibility around impact investing. So we're really looking forward to hearing from Etemore, who's also been involved with this project since the beginning, and Tracey Austin, who's currently with the UK Department for International Trade, but has extensive experience in impact investing, particularly in emerging markets and in Nigeria and Africa itself. So we're really looking forward to hearing from our panel. But before that, most importantly, just so that everyone is on the same page, I'm going to invite my colleague Elena to walk us through a bit of the context for this research, and also particularly some of our very important survey findings. And so, Elena, just invite you to come on now and introduce yourself, and please take us through some of the important findings here.
Thanks a lot, Shonali. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really nice seeing many of you joining right now here in our presentation. So I'm Elena. I'm the lead researcher behind this study, and together with Shonali today, we will present the findings of our research here at the Center for Strategic Philanthropy, which wouldn't have been able without our colleagues on the ground who have this contextual knowledge. And as we will go through, we will present to you both impact investing and philanthropy, and why we're also talking about both of them today. Just to give a bit of a background and to set up that context before we move on to the findings, we have seen that here in Africa, we have the African Continental Free Trade Area, which allows for free trade and is the world's largest one. This is also very important because it's going to bring a lot of million USD dollars to the continent by 2035. And it will also aims to lift 30 million people out of poverty. When it comes to the monies that is flowing to this region, we see that 43% of impact investors allocate impact investments in sub-Saharan Africa, while only 11% of the finances are flowing to this region. Specifically for Nigeria, what we have seen, which is also actually been documented during our interviews with the investees, is that there's major macroeconomic challenges in Nigeria. We have high unemployment, especially when it comes to youth. There's economic instability, including the inflation, and also the currency volatility is a major challenge, which is also mentioned by both investees and impact investors in the space. What we also see, specifically even from COVID-19 and further, is that impact investing capital is flowing into Nigeria has actually increased in the last years. And there's also various actions taking place in the ecosystem that are trying to create, to enhance this ecosystem, such as the creation of the Nigeria National Advisory Board for Impact Investing and the funds by the federal government. Next slide, please. So what have we done here together with our colleagues? We have interviewed 9 investees to gather their experiences and insights when it comes to impact investing and philanthropy in Nigeria. We have also talked to 6 impact investors to understand also their perspective, but also who have a really contextual knowledge of impact investing in Nigeria. And we have also deployed a large-scale survey that has collected over 800 responses, but specifically for impact investing, we were more narrow and we had 54 investees. Now, as to the results of the survey, if we look at the broader picture, we see the various funding sources. This is based on the 750 plus results we had. And we see that impact investing is not the most popular funding source. However, it's really coming up and trying to reach philanthropic grants and from individual donors or foundations. Next slide, please. So as you can see, first is the personal savings, friends and family, philanthropic grants, and then we have impact investing. So it's more traditional forms of funding we see in Nigeria, but impact investing started taking an increasing trend. Now, when we talk about actually impact investees and who are these, we've tried to spread it out thanks to Thelma as a network into as many geographical areas as possible. We actually managed to gather like 50% of the states of Nigeria. As you can see in the graph, we have responses from various areas, but the most popular ones, which are also the most entrepreneurial perhaps as hubs, are Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, and Kano. Now, what do the data actually say about impact investing? So we wanted to see who these impact investors are, and we figured out that most of them are actually individual impact investors who want to bring change into the Nigerian market, followed by private equity and venture capital investors, other funding sources, and also foundations. Then we also wanted to see how satisfied impact investees are with these impact investments that's flowing in Nigeria. And what we have seen is that there's a positive finding, at least compared to philanthropy. So we've seen that over 50% are highly or satisfied with the impact investments they receive, while 50% of them are not highly satisfied or dissatisfied with impact investments. We also wanted to understand how impact investees also select impact investors, because this is a bidirectional relationship. And what we have found is that the most important factor for them is the amount of money that impact investors are willing to allocate, followed up by the expected financial return of returns. Then we also see other more non-financial factors, such as the communication and collaboration they can have with impact investors, the business development services, and the actual genuine interest of impact investors into their organization. Now, whether impact investments are a big pot of money or not, we have seen that the most popular impact investment size on average is 100,000 to 1 million Nigerian naira, which if you convert is like 200 something thousand of US dollars. So we're talking about a small pots of money, and 75% of the total responses we had fell within the three small brands that you will see also in the report. As we have seen in the previous slide, business development services are among the most important factors for impact investees, and this will also be something we touch upon, and in comparison with philanthropy, which my colleague Shonali will touch upon later. What we have seen is that business development services are actually needed into the space, and investees are actually advocating this both for philanthropy and impact investing. And when we ask them specifically whether impact investors should offer additional support, we have received over 50% of them actually saying that most of the time or always impact investors need to go beyond the money they're investing in. So we're seeing that impact investees and investors are not just talking about money, but they need to be thinking about more qualitative and more non-financial aspects behind this relationship they have. And as you can see that in figure 11 of our report, the non-financial support is usually taking the form of a business plan or value proposition development, and then followed up by networking and mentoring. And also, we have also seen, also in the interviews, Shirley will touch upon later, that a lot of them are mentioning that they also need to access the networks of the impact investors. So what they can do is also facilitate market access for them. And some of them also offer support such as financial planning, management, or business administrative support, and other relationships with the relevant ecosystem actors. And here I will conclude and leave Shonali to take over for the qualitative aspects of our study. We see that non-financial support is really gaining prominence and is actually offered together with impact investments. And this is a major difference we see from the results also in the survey with Philanthropy, that this kind of support is not equally offered when it comes to grants and donations in the space of Nigeria. Thanks a lot. Shonali, please take us through the qualitative aspects of our study.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Elena, again, for giving us some of the context for this research, where is the situation, how is the situation looking on the ground, and particularly, the surveys from the demand side. There's some very, very, very interesting findings that came out here. So as Elena mentioned, when going through the methodology for this research, we coupled the quantitative side of this project, the survey results from the virtual questionnaire, with a series of interviews and focus groups, both with entrepreneurs who have received impact investments before, perhaps some of whom are actually here today. If so, welcome. And, I hope that your thoughts and your experiences have been reflected in the report, and also several supply side actors, so the actual investors, were also interviewed in focus group discussions. So from the demand side, what really came out to us during those interviews, during those one-to-one conversations, was particularly, one thing that really stood out to us, and this kind of dovetails on the survey findings as well, is around understandings, meaning making, and the need for greater collaboration. So the first of those things, the understandings and meaning making, is really quite crucial, because you need to create a kind of common set, there needs to be, at least to some extent, a common set of definitions, a common understanding, both from the supply side actors who are obviously giving the capital, who are distributing the capital, and also the entrepreneurs who are on the recipient side. Are there accurate and kind of well-rounded, inclusive understandings of what impact investing really means, what that particular investment really means, what are the expectations? I think that's something where there was quite a bit of fluctuation on, at least from the demand side, around, do we always understand exactly what it is that we're talking about? And part of, from our perspective, part of the solution for that, and also the perspectives of the entrepreneurs themselves, is the need for greater collaboration, greater, kind of enhanced conversation and dialogue, really, really kind of honest and transparent dialogue around what the real needs are and what the expectations are. So this was expressed to us as a desire for true partnership between investors and investees. Also, the kind of expectations around financial returns on investment versus social returns, or more kind of impact focused returns, really thinking about, if you're an investor, are the investees really clear on what the expectations are in terms of returns, both on the social side and on the financial side? If you're an investee, if you're an entrepreneur, are you asking, kind of the full breadth of questions that you could be asking to make sure that you have a really, really clear understanding of what the expectations are? Of course, we are looking at what are the recurring challenges, because, as a research center, we would be absolutely remiss if we did not kind of present a really honest perspective. And the investees, they did say that there are some challenges that kind of persist throughout the cycle of an investment, including delays in disbursement. There are some untapped opportunities that they believe, from the kind of from the demand side perspective, that there are opportunities that are sort of recurrent from the more traditional aid or traditional philanthropy sector. So there is a little bit of disappointment sometimes there that the impact investing space is not tackling those quite as effectively. And, one thing that was very interesting that we found is that impact investors are, kind of being scored by the investees themselves as well. So even in a situation like we're in now, as Elena had explained the context, even though there are some dire funding environments happening in Nigeria and right now, the entrepreneurs are still very discerning, that where they can be, they are discerning about their investors. They're really looking to see if there is value alignment between all parties involved. They really are looking at funding history of their investors. Are investors really putting their money where their mouth is? And so these things are becoming increasingly important, which was great to see. Just a brief minute on the insights from the supplied side focus groups. So really there were some really fascinating insights that came out in the focus group discussions. The investors, they had a lot of concerns around challenges with regulations, kind of financial regulations, policy regulations, and making sure that their entrepreneurs and their partners on the ground get access to investments. They had some questions about how applicable things like the Sustainable Development Goals are to early stage SMEs. If you're a really young organization, are you really thinking about something as broad and kind of amorphous as a Sustainable Development Goal, or are you just trying to keep the lights on at your organization? Looking at impact investing as a spectrum, I won't go through all of these, but just some of them, that really popped out, and you'll all be able to read them in the report now. Impact investing as a spectrum, we'll be talking about this a little bit more, both, in the next slide and on the panel. Currency and equity challenges, a lot of times the investments are coming in a Western currency. There's obviously been a lot of fluctuation and inflation right now in Nigeria, both of the currency and in the economy writ large. We also had some challenges, around gender and geographical distributions. On gender in particular, some of the investors said that they only fund women entrepreneurs. Some of the investors said that they don't actually track whether or not women are being supported by a investment fund, but they kind of track retroactively whether or not women were funded, but it's not a particular goal, or they don't have a particular quota around that. So I'll just move on to our final slide before we can get into the very exciting panel discussion. So like I said right at the beginning, we are a philanthropy research center. So a perspective that we are really, keen to look at further is this kind of, the continuum of capital, as our colleagues at the European Venture Philanthropy Association and Asian Venture Philanthropy Association, and I'm sure all sorts of other groups have really commented on, is this idea that you have a spectrum of capital going towards global development, towards the sustainable development agenda. How do we actually get everything moving from, if you have philanthropic capital on one side and more traditional investment on the other, how do we meet in the middle? How do we get funding flowing all the way through that spectrum? So things are still a little bit challenging. The realities on the ground are, at least in Nigeria, are still a little bit challenging. You still have a situation where 76% of the impact investing recipients in our study, which was a sample of more than 50 investees, 76% of them are still receiving grants. They're still relying on philanthropic and aid funding and grant funding. So only 11% of them actually had received an impact investment before. So that's the full survey. So it's still very nascent. It's still very nascent, and I know we'll hear this from the panel as well, that there's still a lot of ground that needs to be covered in this space before we can really see the transformations that need to occur. We saw that the model has significant potential. 50% of investees are satisfied or highly satisfied with impact investments. I'm sure all of my colleagues on the panel would like to see that number a little bit higher, but there is promise there, particularly because 78% of grant or donation recipients are not highly satisfied with their funding. So it really shows that there is a lot of space for impact investing to make a lot of difference for entrepreneurs. And I'm sure many of you in the audience probably feel the same way about this. So how do we get there? Perhaps we look at things like hybrid schemes. We had participants talk a lot about things like the debt grant model, where first funding comes in as a grant. And then once a measure of success is achieved, it moves into into a debt model. And so that, that was quite positively received. And also, as Elena has already mentioned, there is a huge amount of enthusiasm for non-financial means of support, because that is certainly something that a lot of investees that are also reliant on grants and philanthropic funding, they will not have access to that in a philanthropic situation. So that is something that really must be considered. So that is all in terms of our results. Obviously, please do, once everyone has read the report, we'd love to hear from you. This is our email. We'd love to hear everyone's thoughts, experiences. Please do follow along on social media. I've put our social media at the CSP here, but also for my colleagues at SME.MG and the IIF. So I will stop sharing now so that we can hear from our panel. So now that we have gone through, very kind of done a rapid fire round of the findings in the report, and I'm sure, we obviously didn't have time to cover all of them, so hopefully we'll be able to go through more of them now in the discussion. I just wanted to open up a first question and maybe get everyone's insights on this. So we're talking a lot about, of course, the nature of the conversation around impact investing, philanthropy. Are they two sides of the same coin? Are they, is it a false dichotomy? Does it have to be philanthropy versus impact investing? Is it philanthropy and impact investing? Does philanthropy become impact investing? Where, particularly in the Nigerian context, where you see obviously 76% of survey respondents that have impact investing funds also rely on grants. Where do we see this conversation? Where does it, what's the situation on the ground in Nigeria? Perhaps I'll come to Etemore first for a response here.
Thank you. Since we're all ladies, said ladies first, but we're all ladies, so no ladies first. Thank you very much. Let me say a huge congratulations to the Center for Philanthropy for this very interesting work. I found every page of it very insightful and interesting. Looking at the impact economy, you have philanthropy. There's a role that philanthropy plays. And what we are seeing now, even from the global perspective, you see philanthropic organizations changing their strategy and considering impact investing as an option to preserve a certain portion of their investment, to preserve it and also to make impact. So I don't think there's any trade-off, but we must think strategically, how are we deploying philanthropy and how can we use philanthropy to catalyze more investment, particularly private sector investment. So we must look at it as opposite side of the coins. No false dichotomy. The impact economy is quite broad. Philanthropy is part of it. And how do we get people who are deploying philanthropy not to just look at themselves as different from other investors, but how do we collaborate? We are looking at catalytic capital. How can philanthropy serve as catalytic capital to catalyze social development in Nigeria? That's the role I think philanthropy can play. Other providers of capital across the capital spectrum, impact investor, venture philanthropy, those who are deploying responsible financial instruments are all part of the ecosystem. So there are no false dichotomy, I would say, but it's how do we collaborate? And we are providing that platform for collaboration. And we also reach out to philanthropic organizations. What role do you want to play? How do you want to catalyze capital? So that we are all, partners in growing the impact investment economy in Nigeria. That's what I'll say.
Thank you so much, Etemore. I'll come over to Thelma next, because I know, Thelma, you have had quite a lot of experience both on the philanthropic side and now also on the SME and investment side. So you've really seen, kind of both sides of this conversation, but also you've probably seen quite a lot of evolution in the conversation.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Special thanks to Shonali and Elena and the Center for Philanthropy. It's been a pleasure working with the team, and this research will move the needle on this topic. 10 years ago, when we started talking about impact investing, you couldn't get 10 people around the table. And now when Etemore hosts a meeting, her annual convenings on impact investing, you're looking at 200 to 200 people. And so that even just anecdotally, there's been a growth in the field. This question of whether, and you raise a very valid point of philanthropy versus impact investing, I think it's a discourse that happens in academia, and you know, it has to happen obviously for conceptual clarity. But because this research is looking at the experiences on the demand side, you'll find that there's no such dichotomy. Practically, the people who are receiving the capital are not looking at the identity of the person deploying the capital. Mostly what they would be interested in is the kind of capital and obviously shared values. And as you said, you know, in my past life, I was the first CEO of one of the largest foundations in Nigeria. And trying to start this conversation 10, 12 years ago, you'll find that most of Nigerians who wanted to make impact, their first experience or entry point into doing that was philanthropy, because most of these were extremely wealthy individuals who understood philanthropy, because obviously one of the things that I think that the research will find as you roll it out across Nigeria is that philanthropy is very much entrenched in Nigerian culture and African culture. The idea that in South Africa it would be called Ubuntu, the idea that when you do well, you want the entire society to do well. So that is the first introduction that most, what we will call impact investors today, that's the first introduction they have to wanting to make impact. And as they've started doing that, they get educated on the job. These are billionaires getting educated in most cases, and start to realize that it shouldn't be a binary choice between profit and impact, and that you can, you know, talk about, you can get profit as well as impact. And in fact, that is usually the conversation that people draw me into in Nigeria, where they say, well, I'm creating jobs, surely I'm an impact investor. And so, you know, whilst we have to do the necessary job of conceptual clarification, we have to recognize that it is an entry point. It provides options for philanthropists. And like Etemore said, it should never be an either or. There will always be space for philanthropy in the Nigerian and the African context, because people who want to do good and want to do good in a structured way might find philanthropy you know, very useful. I remember, you know, running the foundation that I worked for, initially my founder was not interested in getting profits. You know, he just wanted to make impact, and grants provided us an opportunity to do that. But as we did that, you know, and I made the case that, you know, with impact investing, the returns that we get can enable us to reach more communities. It was a business case for the organization to get into impact investing. And so the business case is extremely important in the conversation that we have. And as we move along, you'll see that right now in some circles in Nigeria, the conversation is not only between philanthropy and impact investing, but whether impact investing is ESG or whether impact investing is social responsible investment. All of these arguments have, I think, rather than seeing them negatively, I think it's a very healthy indicator of the evolution of the space in Nigeria.
Thank you so much, Thelma. Yes, that's some very, very interesting and thought-provoking points. And I'm going to come over to Tracey on this as well, because I know, Tracey, you know, you've been working in this space, you know, in the African context, in the Western context, particularly here in the UK as well. And I'm sure you've seen quite a lot of, you know, what Thelma was talking about. At first, there was only a few people around the table, and now everybody wants to be part of the conversation. I'm sure that you've seen a lot of these kind of evolutions and transformations as well.
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing I'm going to say is that I tend to call it the G7 or the OPEC environment rather than the Western, because that's the way, because I mean, if we think of Australia, I think that's the way I think of it. But the other thing is, this conversation, if we were having it at a different time, would be very different, because And this probably explains a lot of my personal journey, where of late I've been trying to talk to huge institutional investors, big pension funds, both in the UK and in South Africa. And I'm hoping to get to other African pension funds. But when you're starting to frame the impact conversation, it actually starts with some of the core building blocks, which actually started with smaller transactions, or what I was doing 10 years ago. But for me, the thing that's really exciting about philanthropy, and I'm not a philanthropist myself, never have really worked directly other than working for the Etemore Foundation, but I would say that given where the world is at the moment, and there is a spectacular problem with governments globally in terms of their own home purse, the traditional sources of donor funding, the traditional sources of those grants that we've been talking about, they're constrained, they're not there. Not only that, there's this absolute recognition that private sector, and that's why I've switched to government over the last 9 months, is that there's a much bigger need for government and private sector to work together. Now, where I think philanthropy plays a really important role is it comes with a certain degree of neutrality and some independence, where it's able to try and help steer the course around those very fundamental building blocks that can hopefully mobilize much bigger capital. If you take this out of the equation, I actually have to say that I'm not sure where a huge amount of donor or support money is going to come from to mobilize the conversation. So right now, I think it's the best. I'm personally one of these people who sees the opportunity out of, really trying times. I do my best work under duress and under stress. But I would say that globally, because of the position that we find ourselves in and that we see the G7 governments finding themselves in, this is an opportunity for African environments like Nigeria to use more lateral solutions and actors and actually sources of capital like the ones that you're talking about here today in a more constructive manner.
Thank you so much, Tracey. And yes, these are some great jumping off points. In a moment, I'm going to hand it over to Elena for our next series of questions, but I just wanted to remind everyone in the audience right now to please, as we're going through the panel, if you have any questions about the report itself, or myself or Elena, or if you have any questions that you would like to ask of our wonderful panelists, please pop them not into the chat, but into the Q&A function. If you're on a laptop, it should be at the bottom of your screen, has the two little question boxes. So please start populating those in, as we go along, and we'll get to them shortly, right at the top of the hour. So over to you, Elena.
Thanks, Shonali. Thank you all for this lively discussion. What I would like to stand about for a little bit, and maybe that's a question for you, Etemore, is that when we were seeing the results from the survey, and when we talked also to people on the ground, we've seen though that non-financial support really is important for early stage organizations. Like most of them who answered the survey are early stage organizations, and then our investees were also saying that they don't want an investor who just gives money and then is out for the exit. They want investors who are actually into it, and they're also very intentional about bringing results. When we're going to talk about non-financial support, what is the value of non-financial support, particularly in Nigeria? Have you found investors to be willing and open to offer this kind of forms of support? What's taking place there?
Yeah. Thank you, Elena, for that question. Yes, indeed, there's the willingness for investors to provide non-financial support to companies in their portfolios. We know, one, that is not cheap, it is expensive. So many of them are building a strategy in providing non-financial support alongside financial support, because it's equally important, and many of them would like to preserve their investment. Hence, there is this non-financial components that they must deploy to companies within their portfolio. But there are certain factors that you have to take a look at, that they consider how risky the investment is, how vested they are in that investment, what kind of instruments they are deploying to those companies. All of those factors are very important in considering if I should deploy non-financial support to these companies. You mentioned the study showed business plan and value proposition as the top, requirements by enterprises, and networking, also facilitating access to markets. Some investors do even much more, like, providing follow-on funding, going for meetings with other investors, and providing support through negotiating with other investors, want to protect themselves and their interests in the organization, as well as, to support those organizations, to be not only remain a going concern, remain sustainable, and also focus on the bottom line. We're in it for profit, right? We need to make money. That's where the sustainability aspect of it comes in. So what we're seeing in the space, many investors, I would say, in our network are providing both financial and non-financial support to their enterprises. I'll give you a few examples of investors in our space. One is All On Energy. All On Energy is a renewable, it's a company in the renewable sector providing energy access to underserved and unserved communities, off-grid communities. They have a venture building platform where where they provide incubation programs to early stage entrepreneurs to go through that program, and do that in partnership with NCIC, Nigerian Climate Innovation Center. Now, the enterprises that go through those programs have access to grants up to $80,000. It doesn't just end there. So that's a strategic approach to building their pipeline. So they support those companies through that grants funding. They can provide follow-up funding, a convertible loan of $100,000 to companies that meet a certain key milestones or mileage. And you see some of these companies grow, to growth stage. I've seen some, within the ecosystem from All On. Another one now, I'm going to say, she's here, SME.MG. She can speak more about it. They are a champion because we see SME.MG as an impact platform that they use the She Works Here Accelerator as a strategy to build the pipeline. Now, She Works Here has passed about 1,000 women through their program, which has built a solid pipeline of investment-ready, female-led, female-owned enterprises that can now have access to finance from SME.MG. So SME.MG doesn't just stop there. They support these women with follow-up funding, with access to finance, access to markets, and they've come up with a wonderful app. Of course, it cost them some huge, colossal sums of money to set up an app that has three things: access to finance, access to markets, and capacity building training for women. These are the kind of things we are seeing investors do. There's a willingness there. Also, the capacity sometimes may not be there for some of them because, like I mentioned earlier on, they need finance to provide non-financial support. Other investors like Sahel Capital have technical assistance facilities. Sometimes they use that to provide support to the portfolio companies to report their impact, to track impact, to report impact. And there have been questions around who's going to pay, for impact reporting and tracking your impact. And it must be done. If you're a social enterprise, it must be done. So how about a partnership with your investor to support you to track and report your impact? Because it's good for business, good for them as investors and for them as well. And we also have Alethea Capital, they have, boot camps where they train, enterprises or male enterprises. I think Alethea Idea Boot Camp, and they support those women to have access to finance and then have follow-up funding or other strategic support to help those women grow to growth stage. So there's the willingness. But like I mentioned earlier on, it really depends on the type of investor, risk exposure, the types of instrument that they use and how vested they are in the companies. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Etemore. That's really nice to hear. Since we also started talking about SME.MG and the work they are doing, in our research, we actually have found that geographical considerations and gender are really important when it comes to impact investing. And we've seen that there's certain biases in this space, and it's also very challenging to reach rural areas and women in those areas. What recommendations can you offer to women entrepreneurs or rural SME founders on how to combat accessibility to finance? And what advice you would also give investors themselves on this?
I take it that's a question for me. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Etemore, for that really good profile of our work. Because we're intentionally a gender lens investor, and gender lens investing is a strategy of impact investing. What we do is our own gender lens strategy is to invest in female-owned and female-led. They're two different things. We looked around the landscape in Nigeria and we found that there was a lot of, you find even the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor has this, more female entrepreneurs than male entrepreneurs, but they never grow beyond a certain point. And no one can really explain this phenomena. This is why I'm actually at Cranfield right now doing a doctorate to dig deeper into it. I see colleagues from Cranfield, thanks for being here. And the idea of understanding what can motivate or help female entrepreneurs grow their business is not a sentimental one. For impact investing, the data shows that gender equality will actually not only increase the GDP, but broaden the impact investing space. However, as the study, the study that is being launched today has shown, in Nigeria, you have two countries. You have the South and the North. And women in the North often are not exposed to as many opportunities as they are in the South. Now, that is not for lack of trying. So, for example, our firm, SME.MG, we open our accelerator program to the whole country, but you have to deal with things like internet access, how expensive it is to purchase data. So even when we have virtual programs, a lot of the female entrepreneurs in the North cannot join. They have to deal with electricity challenges. Having the lights on is a luxury in some of these places. So whilst the report is accurate in saying that there are clusters of entrepreneurial activity, Lagos, Kano, Port Harcourt, Abuja, it is really driven by infrastructural challenges as well, because you find that impact investors, I cannot afford to hire 300 staff to go across the country. Nigeria is a massive country. So you have to use technology, and even access to technology is an impediment for many female entrepreneurs. So when you look at the tapestry of challenges that women face, it is not a surprise that in the research, it would look like impact investors are skewed to certain areas. However, with gender lens investing being a global policy framework to invest in women, there's traction in this area. It has to be deliberate. You have to find women where they are, and you have to invest in what the sectors that women congregate in, and also encourage them to go into new sectors. For example, tech-enabled sectors is a sector that we're very much interested in encouraging women, but however, the numbers of women there are still extremely small. The other thing is, when we look at the availability of capital, culture plays a significant role in how capital is available to women. In parts of Nigeria, you still have to take your husband to access a loan, or have a male member of your family co-sign for you. That in itself is an impediment to most women who may not want to get married, starting a business. So there are practicalities around some of these challenges that maybe, no matter how wide the research is, you're not able to capture, but we must acknowledge that there's certainly a growth. Being part of the National Advisory Board on Impact Investing, which Etemore coordinates, we have deliberately highlighted gender, not as an option, but as something that is imperative to growing impact investing. We also are looking at ways that we build the numbers of female-led fund managers. Okay, so I'm one of the few female-led and female co-owned funds in Nigeria, emerging funds even, and that's still a very small number. Self-identified female-led fund managers are about 5 in a country of 200 million people. If you're looking at investing in women, the data shows that women investing in women is one of the ways to grow the gender lens investing. And this is not a Nigerian problem, it's across the continent, right? But the conversation has started. With a lot of kind of the work that we've been doing around growing the accelerator, because people ask us all the time, why do you crowd in so many women into the accelerator? And the reason we do that is to debunk a misconception that there are not enough women to invest in. So, we do this and we make sure that the numbers are available. And in the end, yes, you may invest in a smaller percentage of that, the thousands of women that we impact, but certainly it's bigger than it was a few years ago. And so this is an area that I feel that over time, research in this area, we'll talk about recommendations certainly, but more research in this area is needed. And even just looking at how over the years, female networks around entrepreneurship have really galvanized, entrepreneurship among women in Nigeria. A few years ago, you couldn't find female entrepreneurs that own businesses that would be in excess of $10 million. Now there's, annually, now there's a good community of them. So, tracking that in the future will be very important as well.
Thanks so much, Thelma. It's really nice hearing about this, and also the point you made on accelerators. We've seen through other interviews that lots of them actually found out about impact investments by participating into these things, and this is what really helped them take off. So it's really important for early stage organizations, particularly, to engage with it. Now, as we've been talking about accessibility of finance, it's also about the ticket size itself. Maybe that's a question for Tracey. What we found in our survey and in our interviews is that the size of the funding that comes to the investees is actually quite small, and we're seeing that most of them come under $20,000. So why is this the case? Is it risk aversion of investors? Is there something else? What needs to be done to bring more capital into Nigeria? What are your thoughts on this, Tracey?
So I think before I answer, I've got 4 reasons why I think it exists, but I have to caveat, I think there's somebody who's always got to be the controversial one, and that's going to be me today, because there's no point in me just saying what I think the status quo is. I think the first thing is, this is not a Nigeria-centric problem. This is an emerging market problem where we have capital absorption challenges. Therefore, we need to create local currency markets. We need to be where funding is done in Naira. We can talk about the issues around gross and net, but the biggest challenge is we don't have deep local funding markets. We don't have secondary markets. But the other big challenge that I have, and it's answered in 2 ways, is it's not private equity. Private equity doesn't work in an environment where an ecosystem is incredibly challenged and the cost of investing is incredibly high. If you look at why Silicon Valley, for example, is such a success, it benefited for over 30 years of direct government money to make it what it is. If you look at Israel's tech ecosystem, even if you look at what's been done around the tech startup acts in Africa, these are strong government initiatives, and some of them are stronger than others. But there's no single solution around private equity. And that's not to say private equity shouldn't work, but it isn't working around the earlier stage, closer to the startup space and closer to impact investing. And then the other thing, which I really take exception, but I'm going to give a positive example for hope. Unfortunately, it's not a Nigerian example, but my other issue is around intermediation and the right models. If it's not private equity, and we do want to look at some kind of funds, then we have to accept that fund of funds models aren't going to be needed, because we need to find a pooling mechanism where we then can go and find other intermediaries who are actually engaged with SMEs or with owner entrepreneur founders on the ground. But the biggest aversion, and if you look at all of the stuff that comes out of the US and the UK, is institutional investors will tell you, I'm not paying 2 layers of fees. So therefore, they don't believe in the fund of fund model. Yet when you're looking at a fragmented, hard to reach ecosystem in Africa, how else are you going to get the money out there? So I said I'd give you an example. So a positive data point, which I think is worthwhile celebrating, but really looking at, is there's an SME Fund 2, which is being raised. It had some catalytic capital from the USAID, but it has actually managed to mobilize a biggish local pension fund to come into that. And that means that that pension fund has accepted that a fund of funds is the way to reach SMEs, and there's a strong gender focus. There's a strong previously disadvantaged founder focus. The other thing that was really interesting is that actually the SA SME Fund had to forgo the second layer of fees. Now, it's not that they gave up those fees. They've structured in a way that they've acknowledged that there's a need to be more sort of, I would say, more dynamic and more pragmatic around how to mobilize that money. But the simple reality is we're trying to use not fit for purpose models, and we're trying to force fit them into environments. And when they don't work, we want to blame the environment, or we want to blame the country or the African narrative. And I'm an African myself, and I'm the biggest critic of our continent when we don't do things right. But when we're using the wrong tools to begin with, and we want miraculous results, are we surprised we don't get the right outcome that we're wanting? So from my perspective, I think structurally there's a real rethink here. And again, if we bring back the role of where philanthropy has that space, you have the voice, you have the neutrality, you can help shape some of that conversation and advocacy around what kind of models we need to try and mobilize money into smaller investments so that they can grow and scale. And by the way, not everyone's a unicorn. I think that's the other thing that I just want to put out there, because this whole unicornism that's come out in this world, I think is a very, and hopefully we're seeing some balancing of what's going on given what's happened in the whole tech space at the moment. But I see that, I think, Thelma, you've got a comment or a question, so I'll stop there.
No, bravo, Tracey. I think, you know, this is why webinars like this are very important. I think, you know, you are speaking about something we deal with practically. I've been told many times to change the model of our fund and set up a private equity fund. And I argue that the women that we invest in cannot provide the exits that PE funds look at. However, the DFIs want more PE structured funds. And so the fit for purpose question is extremely important when you look at impact investing. And also because I've worked in two examples. So for example, my colleague from Chapel Hill Denham is here. You know, our fund was started with local capital. So the importance of local capital cannot be overemphasized. However, local capital can only take you so far. So the validity it gives you to go to other investors is key, but the big capital is out there. And I think one of the areas that I feel that African impact investors really need to improve on is a critical mass of impact investors across the continent saying the same thing. I know that some convenings have tried, but it's not really getting traction because the sums of money are still too small that come down to the SMEs that really need it. And we're still too few in the spaces that we all participate in. You know, it's still the same usual suspects. And, you know, while it's necessary to be involved, if you're seeing the same people year in, year out for 10 years, the sector is not growing in terms of influence, in terms of people that can actually influence. Having worked for an African billionaire, I think we have to look for ways to encourage more and more of them to be involved in the advocacy side. So they're very interested in the deploying capital, but only, you know, and you know, this is, he's a case study in the research, so I can safely say Tony Elumelu, people like that also see it as a responsibility to take on advocacy on Afrocentric investing and what that looks like. And he's even coined a phrase around it, Afro-capitalism. I think that type of nomenclature, you know, that identifies the problem, localizes it, making it indigenous, will certainly bring more players to the field. I will end with, you know, the question around how much this is still a clique. And I think that is something we have to self-critique. People give money to people they know, right? And so if you're an African and you're not able to be visible, and you can be doing the best work possible, but if anyone can't see you or you are not in the right spaces, you won't get funding. That is the reality of it. And that's why the work of the Impact Investment Foundation is critical in Nigeria, because what it has done is kind of democratize the space to bring in players that have been previously excluded, to have their voices, you know, in the conversations that we're having.
Thank you so much, Tracey, and thank you so much, Thelma, for those very interesting interventions. And I think this is actually, both Thelma's and Tracey's points, a perfect segue to come back over to Etemore a little bit, because there's some reflections here potentially about, specifically about the advocacy side, the engagement side. How do we get, obviously, more governments involved? Tracey made an excellent point about the enormous support that a lot of startups and very prominent figures have gotten from government investment in the first place. So when it comes to organizations that serve either in an advisory capacity, like, for example, the National Advisory Board on Impact Investing, foundations like the Impact Investors Foundation, when you're trying to get all of these different stakeholders around the table. So what function does that really serve, and how, who else needs to get involved in this space to really, to keep it from being, as Thelma said, sort of the same faces appearing over and over?
Just to think about where we are, and as a country in impact investing, I wouldn't say it's different it might be a little bit different for other African countries, but we are a growing interest. Impact investing is a growing interest, both globally and both locally. We're not where we used to be. And that informs the kind of intervention that we decide to take in the market, from having the right policy framework. Who do we speak to? We're speaking to government, we're speaking to policymakers. What we want them to do, to recognize impact investing, to incentivize more impact capital, from the private sector, as well as increasing the demand for impact capital by social enterprises and micro, small, and medium enterprises as well. How do we, address market asymmetry, the supply and demand market asymmetries? So we're speaking to investors, we're speaking to social enterprises. We are also broadening, the pool of capital from across a capital continuum. I really like the fact that we are all clear that there are no dichotomies between philanthropic capital and also commercial capital. We also need to speak with the providers of philanthropic capital, bring them to the table. Then on the intermediary side, we need to strengthen our intermediaries, having the right intermediaries, whether intermediaries facing the market or intermediaries facing investors, creating strong linkages to move capital at the speed and velocity that's required for our markets. We need to speak to intermediaries. We need to also build a pipeline of investment-ready enterprises. And who are we speaking? We're speaking to those providing those services. We're also speaking to enterprises, to build their capacity and having the deliberateness to support those enterprises to become investment-ready. Otherwise, what will happen is, like Thelma said, the usual suspect coming together, receiving capital, from the same capital providers, and there's no real growth, and then the investors at the end of the day will not be able to deploy capital. So what we do, as intermediaries supporting the market, either as Impact Investors Foundation, supporting also the Nigerian National Advisory Board for Impact Investing, is identifying what the gaps are and using a multifaceted approach to bridge this gap, either at the macro level, the micro level, the meso level. At the macro level, we talked about policy, the meso level, engaging with intermediaries or investors, the micro level, building pipeline, etc. So the National Advisory Board and Impact Investors Foundation, we engage all of the stakeholders, governments, investors, business leaders, regulators, associations. And in some cases, we enter partnership, all of this to strengthen the market. And we have a few of those kind of partnerships. We have at the National Advisory Board, we're working with the Ford Foundation. We're working with the GIZ, Nigerian Competitiveness Project. We're working with the Ministry of Budget and National Planning to facilitate the establishment of a $1 billion wholesale impact investment fund, which is going to have, which is a fund-of-fund model to provide impact capital, as well as to build a market. Our market is very nascent, and we say we need a fund that advocates, we need a fund that provides first loss capital, we need a fund that can blend with other capital and also crowd in capital, from the market to grow the social investment, overall social investment market in Nigeria. So these are some things in which we are doing to build the impact investment market. We are not where we used to be, like Thelma said, 10 years ago. Even 3 years ago, when I joined the market, investors who didn't want to be known as impact investors were there, but they were kind of interested because there's this pool of capital coming internationally and looking for those to partner with, but they were impact capital. So there was a lot of impact washing. So we needed to be deliberate in creating awareness about impact investing and, coming out strongly that there are no trade-offs. If you want to provide concessionary capital below market rate capital, you're welcome. If you want to provide market rate capital above market rate capital, you're welcome. However, we wanted to see that intentionality in creating impact, in measuring impact, in strengthening the impact practices is what we are trying to advocate. We're not where we want to be, but we're not where we used to be.
Thank you so much, Etemore. And I think that's I think that's a really, really, kind of key takeaway, is that perhaps we're not yet where we want to be, but look how far we've come, right? I think that's quite a bit of the story in the report, perhaps as well, right, Elena? There's so much, there's so much that has been done and so much progress that's been made, and we are getting so many insights from all of these entrepreneurs that have been recipients of impact investing. But then, of course, that just ends up, for us as researchers, it just ends up throwing up so many more questions, which, is perhaps a good thing. Just a reminder to everyone, we have about 20 minutes left, and thank you so much for everyone's engagement in the chat. But I did want to remind everyone that we have the open Q&A function. So please do pop your questions in there. I know probably many of you sitting in the audience, please don't feel shy. Our panelists, as you can see, are wonderful and enthusiastic. So please do feel free to pop your question into the Q&A, and we will answer it live. And I will just come over to Tracey and Thelma for one other particular question on a finding that came out in the report. And it's about this idea of, since we're talking about not existing in binaries, and not existing in just the philanthropic world or just the investing world, it doesn't have to just be grants versus equity and debt. We did have several respondents talk very enthusiastically about hybrid models, things like the debt grant model, where they sort of kind of, they're able to reap the benefits of both types. And are these types of models, are they of interest to folks on the supply side? Are they just, are they very nascent and only a few organizations really want to get involved in things like hybrid models? Or is this something that could potentially really take off, and so that you do get that sort of almost a win-win situation? I'll come over to Tracey first, and then over to Thelma.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I'm going to have to leave, but I'm going to leave hopefully on a point of something slightly more positive, in the sense that one of the best models that I'd seen of late was one of the DFIs using returnable grants. And they're using third-party money, and they're managing it in a way where they're trying to combat bias, and they're trying to take on more risk in the process. And this speaks to supporting some of those business support services, and this speaks to supporting market access. It's not commonplace. It's probably not happening enough. And when we looked at one of the reasons why it's probably being resisted, particularly by investment officers in organizations, so you can guess probably who I'm talking about here, was actually that a lot of the legality, the tracking, the monitoring, the cumbersome nature of what's perceived to be around what do you do with a grant that's small, that doesn't actually materialize? Do you write it off? Do you convert it into debt? How do you create a valuation? But I would say that that's very much part of the conversation around trying to take a shift. A lot of interesting models being looked at around the climate space, I guess perhaps because there's prolific money around, but I would say that this is being looked at, and exceptionally we need to do lots more of this kind of thinking, because the very vanilla instruments that we have are never going to make those gaps go away, or not going to address it. So a little bit of hope, but much work to be done. I'm sure that you can build on that. Thanks. I'm going to drop off, but thank you to everyone, and I'm you'll share my details if anyone wants to reach out to me. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracey, and thank you so much for your interventions this afternoon. It's been super enlightening, and for all of your advice on the project. I'll then come over to Thelma with kind of the same question on is there a real chance for an expansion of kind of these hybrid models? Is it just something that people want to try once or twice with no intention of really kind of making it the primary focus, or is this something that we can really try and push for in the future?
Yeah, so I mean, the phrase blended finance describes what you're referring to. And there's always, I think this also grants seem to be getting a bad name somehow. Grants are extremely useful for whether you call it capacity building, investment readiness, catalytic financing. Grants are extremely useful, but grants are not sustainable. And that's where the conversation about bringing in different types of capital become necessary. So we use grants. For example, after COVID hit, we knew that the women entrepreneurs in our accelerator could not properly absorb debt capital, because obviously they were trying to recover. And so we were able to deploy a grants facility for a while, right? So grants must be timed, and they must be for a specific intervention, right? And then you look at debts and equity, and the nature of for us, we use revenue-based financing, models for entrepreneurs, because, like I said, some female entrepreneurs do not want anyone to take a stake in their business. From my vantage point, that's what we see, or don't even understand how equity works. So that's an important part about impact investing. The fact that the investee and the investor have to be on the same page in terms of investment education, because many people have, unintentionally given away their businesses through investments. We have examples in Nigeria right now of people who've grown businesses, and then through bad investment deals, they've lost their businesses. So, that's not good for the impact investing or any kind of investment space. So that's where you need things like grants to build the capacity of the investee, and to ensure that the investee can absorb capital that comes in later. So I think it's more a continuum of somebody mentioned the continuum earlier on. I think it's more a continuum of capital, and ensuring that, because we're talking about the demand side once again, that whether it's social entrepreneurs or any other type of entrepreneurs understand the capital that they're accessing, because if they do, there will be proper absorption of the capital, and then we will have more success stories, which is something that I'm hoping we'll talk about, because you can't really grow impact investing in Nigeria or anywhere else if there are not more success stories about why people should become impact investors. Another thing that I hope we talk about in very little time, maybe the questions is this whole idea about metrics and measurement. Most people, you can't talk about impact investing without talking about how you measure impact. And this is where it gets confusing to almost everyone. I think the field itself is still not in complete alignment in how you measure impact. And so many people might be doing variations of impact investing, but do not want to call themselves that, because they're struggling with the eventual question that they would be asked: how do you track your impact?
Yes, thank you so much, Thelma. Yes, and I think that's so important, that bit that you brought up right at the end there is particularly the need for success stories, because no one's going to come in if they don't see some sort of track record of success. And how do you create those success stories? I mean, there are success stories, but how do you actually, kind of develop a platform for those folks? But you have to have the metrics in place. You have to be able to measure what success looks like. We talk about this a lot at the center around, success is not just about inputs and outputs, regardless of what form, the financing takes, whether it's a grant, whether it's impact investment, whether it's blended finance. It can't just be, the impact output spectrum. It has to be about, what are the longer term outcomes? How are you actually, creating change, even if it's a small, kind of localized change. And so I just wanted to point out, I did see that, a couple of different folks in the audience were trying to raise their hands in order to ask a question. If you're not able to access the Q&A function to pop your chat in there, please do go ahead. Elena and I are both monitoring the chat now. So if it's easier for you to just put your questions directly into the chat box, please go ahead and do that. So, because I did see some raised hands, which are now down. But before we, so as we let everyone get their questions into either the chat or the Q&A, I see, oh, great. I see Daniel has asked a question into the Q&A. We'll jump over to that first. So Daniel has asked, how can we ensure that this impact investing is not abused by investors to ensure this is measured and uphold accountability? Also, secondly, is there a clear difference between impact investing and CSR? So actually, thank you very much, Daniel. That's not even one question. That's two very interesting questions. So perhaps let's start at the beginning. How can we make sure that impact investing is not abused, and how can we ensure it's measured and uphold accountability? Etemore, I'll come over to you. Perhaps you can kick us off there.
Thank you. Very interesting question, Daniel. The first part of it is not abusing impact investing. I think it's all the concept around impact washing, that in recent times we have investors calling themselves impact investors, and are not really impact investors, or not, doing impact. Hence, impact investing has, several tools to strengthen the practice of impact investing. The Global Impact Investing Network is very big on, providing, resources and support. I think they came up with the core characteristics of impact investing, which moves or differentiates impact investing from traditional investing. First is the intentionality. You must have the intention to make an impact. And if you have that intention to make an impact, it must be measurable. So you must measure your impact, which, just makes it different from traditional investment. And then again, there must be, the intention or expectation of returns. So, and which makes it different from philanthropy. The expectation of returns can be, I mentioned earlier on, below market rate, above market rates, So these are some core characteristics that makes impact investing different from traditional investing. And, as and an impact investor will want to strengthen the practice of impact investing. And, you have clear matrices like job creation. How many jobs are you creating? These are some of the outcomes you're going to be measuring as an impact investor, depending on the investment thesis or your focus as an investor. Gender lens investing, if you're a gender lens investor. How many women's life are you changing, the direct beneficiary? So there are clear matrices that an investor will use that will track and report. So when you look at this balanced scorecards, you can call yourself definitely an impact investor if you are, doing impact and they're intentional about that impact. Going to maybe the second, I think about to ensure measured and to uphold accountability. Accountability we're talking about is, reporting your impact. So we must track and we must report impact. That takes us back to the contribution that Thelma made earlier on. Which standards are we going to use? Because there are various standards, there are various tools out there. But as long as you're using one of them, I think using any of them in the first instance brings in some level of accountability, transparency, and integrity in your work as an impact investor. Going to the second point, the clear difference between impact investing and CSR. I think one of the core characteristics of impact investing is the expectation of returns, financial returns. So impact investing marries the traditional way of investing, as well as bringing in philanthropy. So there is the expectation of returns, your financial bottom line, as well as the social and environmental impact measurable that you want to make. So CSR is corporate social responsibility by a corporate organization, and it's part of their give back to the society. There's no expectation of financial return, so it doesn't make it impact investing. However, there are conversations that people are having with corporate organizations. How do you move from CSR to CSI, corporate social investment, where you get some level of returns, even if it's not financial returns of social impact? These are some areas that we can think about having these kinds of conversation in our platform. I know when we first started in 2019, and even the year prior, 2018, the very first conference, I think Ford Foundation did the first Impact Investment Conference in Nigeria. Some of the questions that were asked were these questions, and you see that there is a lot of lack of awareness about impact investing. Some people see impact investing as philanthropy. Some people see impact investing as concessionary, but we wanted to bring in that clarity. So we created some dichotomy between impact investing and philanthropy, but in actual fact, we shouldn't be looking at the dichotomy and looking at and creating those binaries. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Etemore, for your reply and the insights. We also have more questions coming into the Q&A, and I'm also mindful that we don't have many minutes left, so I'll read it aloud. So we have a question by Zimu saying that there's a few questions around the basics of impact investing, and maybe Thelma can also help me out with that. We're seeing what are we looking for when it comes to impact investment decision criteria, whether having high growth potential being placed high in the criteria, so perhaps of impact investors' decision making, is this really important? We have seen some things that I can answer partially that we've seen in the from the investee side, that many of them said that they had to prove their investment ready, but many of them said that they need impact investing to actually take off, the same way that they use philanthropy grants. So this is what we've heard, but Thelma can help me out with that. And then we have a third question. How does impact investment fund balance the potential conflicting interests between financial and social or environmental return on investment?
Okay, thank you very much. That question is for Zimu, who happens to be my supervisor from Cranfield, so I better answer it very well.
You're really on the spot now, Thelma.
I am. Can you imagine? No, thank you very much, Zimu. Excellent question. So the first one is, how do we frame our criteria? And as Etemore said, all impact investors, I think the common denominator is intentionality. Intentionality is the cornerstone of impact investing. That means in terms of the institutional strategy, it's designed to deliberately invest in getting social returns, getting environmental returns, and financial returns. So whether it is a fund like mine that looks at gender, or a fund that looks like climate, those three criteria have to be met. If one criteria is missing, it is not impact investing. And so that is what makes impact investing different from socially responsible investing, which essentially deals with deciding through a process of elimination what the investor will not invest in. So for example, investors that say they will not invest in alcohol or tobacco are socially responsible investors, which impact investing is also different from when you talk about ESG, because that's really a conversation that's going on now that, well, if we just have ESG policies, are we not doing impact investing? No, ESG is really about a company's corporate practices rather than impact investing. So once in creating the criteria, whatever the sector is, it must have social returns, provide social returns. It must have indicators that have environmental returns as well as financial returns. So that's the first question. Did you want me to attempt another one, Elena, or just?
And now this response was really great, Thelma. I'm also seeing that we have one more question. Maybe that's the last one we take for this panel for today, because I'm mindful we have to close. And then we have one final question for our panel before we let you go. So we have a question by from Bola saying impact investors of focus on rural impact. However, a greater volume of people may be impacted from investing in urban scenarios such as electrification. Are impact investors actually missing a trick here to deliver the greatest amount of impact for the funds they provide? This is open for both of you, any of you who wants to take it up, Etemore and Thelma. Etemore, do you want to start? Thank you.
Thank you. I was just reading and reflecting a little bit deeper on the bonus question. I think it's a combination of things. Impact investor will go to an area where they can make the most impact as well as financial returns. They're going to the rural area is not just about their main focus is where can I get the largest returns, both social and environmental returns, CSORI, and as well as, your financial return, which is the financial bottom line. Maybe you're looking at just a few investors, impact investors that that have been deploying, funds to the rural areas. I'm sure maybe you've come in contact with several investors, investing in smallholder farmers, in rural areas in northern Nigeria. But if you read this report, the report doesn't, give that it doesn't corroborate your points. Whereas the report is looking at, a skew of investment towards urban areas. But what we are seeing is that impact investing are actually, happening in places where you have a lot of the investors, who are able to invest, particularly in Lagos and in Nigeria. There are some other, Lagos and Abuja, I beg your pardon, where you have more impact investors deploy resources, to those two major hubs. A few of them, are deploying capitals, to the rural areas, like Olom, for instance. I mentioned them again, providing, electrification, I would say off-grid energies to communities that are underserved and are in off-grid areas. There are several of them like that, but I think it's a mix of both. But it might just be that you know more investors who are investing in the rural area. I don't know if Thelma can add, from your own experience as an impact investor, where do you invest? Are you seeing more investors in the rural area?
And I think,
I think
Thelma, before you answer that, I was just thinking that because we are short on time, we might combine your response with also a last minute question that came in from Justice around what is the best way to attract impact investing from investors as an entrepreneur in Nigeria. I bet you are certainly talented enough, Thelma, to combine the answers in one. So.
I think Etemore did justice to the previous question. So I'm just going to focus on how to access impact investors. I think just to be intellectually curious, a lot is happening in the market. And just to know who is out there, like more and more people are actually describing themselves as impact investors, and ensure that you go to, there's so many convenings now around impact investing. Please come to the annual convening by the Impact Investment Foundation. It's a really good networking opportunity, and also an opportunity to learn, because by the time you listen to all the presentations, it's almost like taking a master's on impact investing. So, get involved. And I think also, we've talked a lot about impact investing from the entrepreneurs, from the investor side, but also becoming impact-oriented entrepreneurs. I think if you are an impact-oriented entrepreneur, you will attract impact investing, because more and more entrepreneurs are looking for businesses that are socially conscious, businesses that are cognizant of their impact on the environment, and of course, businesses that provide financial returns. So even as an entrepreneur yourself, you can start to look at how your businesses fit those criteria. And by doing that, you are essentially putting yourself in front of the line for impact investing.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. I'm afraid we are actually out of time now. But we just wanted to say a huge thank you again to our panelists. Tracey unfortunately had to leave early, but a huge thanks to Tracey. Massive thanks also to Etemore and to Thelma, and of course every one of our participants who took the time out of their very busy schedules to participate in the survey, to give us interviews, to participate in a focus group discussion. We have just, my colleague is very kindly posting into the chat how you can join our mailing list at the CSP. In case anyone is interested in keeping up with news, we usually circulate events such as this one that might be of interest. Thelma at one point mentioned the Tony Elumelu Foundation. We at the CSP have actually done a case study on the Tony Elumelu Foundation, which will be launched in February. So we'll be circulating that event on our mailing list. So please do sign up. And I just wanted, and yes, and also of course, most importantly, the report is being circulated. Again, you will find the link in the chat there. So please do save that, have a read through when you have a chance. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the report, Elena and myself. And please do keep in touch, and wishing you a very wonderful rest of your afternoon and a very wonderful festive season ahead. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you all, everyone. Take care.
Bye.